So thanks everyone for coming. Welcome to today's expert talk online. And this week it's about team community and how to make sure it happens. I'm Julia Bellis. I'm a product manager at Equal Experts, and I'm currently working on building pricing tools for holiday rental properties. I'm really excited to introduce Werner, who it sounds like a lot of you know already, who's our speaker today. Werner is a delivery lead with Equal Experts, and he's been building and leading teams for the last 9 years in a whole range of sectors, from satellite broadcasting to real-time training and surveying systems. Werner is passionate and excited about building great environments and creating teams with strong ways of working who really value team community and empathy. And I think that having a strong community in a team is a really powerful tool to make somewhere a better place for everyone to work, and even maybe to make a team more productive. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about how to make it happen. We are going to take some audience questions towards the end of the conversation, so please do add your questions when you think of them using the Zoom Q&A function. And I have whittled on until 6 minutes, so I hope everybody's joined us by now. And I'm going to hand over to Werner, our speaker tonight.
Thank you very much. That's a beautiful introduction. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen. So, oh, maybe we should just check the LinkedIn and make sure that people can get in, so there's no weird messages of we can't get in. Anyway, so yeah, Werner Smit. My talk tonight is on the importance of team community. It's something that I only learned about team community later on in my career. I never really got it until we had this epiphanic moment. But I started back in the day as a Java developer, and I developed Java for many years. And then I eventually decided I actually want to go into more of the business side, the project side of things, the human side of what really makes software work and what really makes business tick. And my journey as a Scrum Master, I was building teams, and these teams were built, you know, by the book, but with some philosophy behind it, and really good teams. Like, there was nothing really wrong with them. But the moment they got challenged on, for example, their ways of working or their vision and mission, or they would lose their vision and mission, they would crumble. And it never made sense to me why teams kept on crumbling when we were doing technically all the right things. Until we did an experiment at MultiChoice, was a satellite broadcaster. Well, they still are a satellite broadcaster in South Africa. And we built this really strange team that turned out to be where the penny dropped for me. Because what we built in that team wasn't just a team, we built a community of people. And they were really focused on what they were doing and super interested in what they were involved with, and they were really passionate about it, and they had a very open style of communication. And that's really where it kicked off for me, that there is this concept of community inside of a team that is so seldomly seen these days, when people just mechanically put teams together. So this is where we really start the journey. And I mean, what would a talk be without some cliche definitions? But these are good to understand so that we can have a good conversation about team community. So what is a community? It's a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. It's as simple as that. It's nothing, it's not rocket science. But what's special about it is it's the condition of sharing or having certain attitudes and interests in common. And this is really where the difference comes in with the community, is that concept of having an interest in common, a shared goal or a shared vision or a shared mission. And that's the really important bit. Then you get an ecosystem, and sometimes these two things are confused, but they really shouldn't be. An ecosystem is the physical environment in which you find yourself. And it's not the same as a community. A community lives inside of an ecosystem. So a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment, that's the really important bit. A complex network of interconnected systems. So the one is where you find the processes and where you find the ways of working and how we set it up. And the other one is where you find the more human aspect of it, the empathy, the caring, the drive. That's in the community itself. An ecosystem without a community is technically empty. There's not much going on there. And then the last one is you. So, I mean, you're obviously awesome, which is really great. but you're also a complex system of interdependent parts. You would notice that if you go into any biological chart, and then you're a living being with feelings and stuff. And those feelings and stuff is what really is important inside of communities. And it's a lot of the time what makes the difference between being in a team and being in a community is how we treat the feelings and stuff. So that's the really important bit to start getting your head around. If we look at what a community can be, now it's interesting that when you put a group of people together, and especially if you've ever been on the roller coaster that's called a startup, it's really easy to group those individuals together because it's a small unit and everybody sort of understands what's going on and they all sort of pull in the same direction. So in that sense, if you think about a startup, the ecosystem is the community. They're synonymous. They're the same thing because it's such a small group of people and they're functioning towards the same goal. It's not really a difficult space to live in. But when you start looking at the complex environments that most of us actually find ourselves in, so knowledge workers in general, in consulting or whether you're permanently employed, it doesn't matter. We mostly find ourselves in large organizations, banks, automotive, retail, mining. And in those areas, that is where you normally see the creation of communities, smaller groupings of individuals with shared interests trying to execute a vision and mission that they understand and believe in. And this is normally where the ecosystem is extremely large. And that's why communities form, these smaller groups of interrelated people. This is where we start seeing that the smaller groups really focus on what they're doing and what their mission is and how they're trying to achieve it. And hopefully within the larger scope of what the ecosystem needs. Just so that we can get some stuff out of the way, there's a reason why we seek out community. So before we get to why community is important, let's just look at why we seek them out. We have all been through the plague in the last 2.5 years, and I think we've all learned that isolation really ain't good for us. Human beings have never dealt well with isolation for prolonged periods of time. There's a tremendous amount of research on this. There's been some really wacky experiments performed from the 1920s all the way up to now. And some people very rarely can do it, and most people can't. We just don't deal well with isolation. It's not good for us. The second thing is that we find it unnatural to be in a group. And this is not necessarily a social group, but more of a commercial group and not communicate. And this is not an introvert-extrovert thing. This is not what it's about, but it is unnatural for a human being to be in a group and not communicate. And this is generalization. Obviously, there are individuals who have no problem being in the middle of a bustling street or whatever and not caring to communicate. But it is something that we need to take into consideration. We seek out community so that we can express ourselves, whether that is verbally or whether that is through body language or whether that is through action. It doesn't matter, but we have a need to express ourselves as human beings. And communities are really great places for doing that. And then the last one is especially knowledge workers, but people in general. Humans need a sense of belonging and purpose. It is really important to understand and to feel that I am part of something that is bigger than me, and I have a purpose in this thing. And that drives a tremendous amount of not just experience gathering, but also of creating empathy and creating a sense of belonging. And that is very important in seeking out communities, or why communities are being sought out by individuals. There's something that we need to know about building strong communities. Fun and safe are results. They're not inputs. I cannot take a giant bag of safe, and that's safe, normal safe, not safe with a small e. I can't take a giant bag of safe and just throw it over a team and suddenly everyone feels like, oh, I'm so relaxed and everything's cool and this is such a great place to be. Like that's not how safe works. Safe and fun are products. They happen because of taking certain actions, of doing something. They're the result of taking action. So as I said, you can't make an environment safe, but you can make it, for example, fail-friendly. You can make it a learning-first environment. You can make it a positive, accountable environment. And those elements will eventually create what we deem as a safe environment. So to give you an example, if you were to look at a mine, you don't make a mine safe. You apply the regulations and the standards that are required for mine safety in order to operate a safe mine. So the safety in the mine is a result of doing something else. And this is true in most areas that you will find it. It's a result of taking certain actions. Now, specifically in team environments and in community environments, having something like a fail-friendly or a fail-positive space is extremely important. For the simple reason is that that's how we get people to not be afraid of taking chances, to not be afraid of innovating, to not be afraid of saying, I have an idea and I would like to share that with everyone. And hand in hand with that comes something called positive accountability. And positive accountability says it's the concept of if you are going to experiment or if you're going to innovate something, whether it succeeds or it fails, it doesn't matter. You have a responsibility to ensure that you teach the rest of the community about what has taken place. So it's the concept of that's how we create a safe space, is that we trust people to do things that are innovative and experimental, but we also expect that they take responsibility for educating the rest of us on what they've done. Then the concept of fun. Now, I'm going to use just a very cliche one here. So I can throw as many bottles of vodka at you, or as many free drinks after work, or as many bean bags, free coffees, llamas. It doesn't matter what I throw at you. It doesn't necessarily make your environment fun. So fun is a product, and especially for knowledge workers, fun is a product of finding stimulating ways of working. If what you're involved in, the community and the environment that you're in, and we spend a lot of time there, if you find the work that you're doing both interesting and stimulating, that's what starts to create fun. So it's fun for you as an individual to be there because the work is stimulating and it's giving you pleasure and joy to continue doing that work. If you're part of a community where people are interacting in an open and honest way, and we are celebrating things, and we're really focused on making sure that we're bringing our best at all times, that's what really creates fun for us in a work environment. I'm not saying that free drinks don't matter. I think they're very cool and they do help. But the real trick in creating a fun environment is making sure that the environment is stimulating. That really helps a lot with building community and ensuring that people are enjoying what they're doing. Communities are built. Now, this is how we build communities. So we're almost at the point where we understand why communities are important, but let me tell you how we build communities. I've got a really nice analogy for this. It's I don't know if you guys know these old Western towns, like really back in the day. I love Westerns, they're great. But normally what would happen is you would have a row of buildings in a main street, and that you would normally you'd ride up to the town on your horse, like practicing my horse sound. It's really cool. And you would get there, and we are looking at something like establishing of the community standards and reason for existing. But if you put that into our town, when you get to the entrance of the town, there are like 2 billboards up. And the one has a bunch of names and a bunch of roles. So for example, Sheriff Joe Schmo, Deputy whoever, bartender so-and-so. Every role, every person that's in the town is actually listed down with what they do there and what their interests are. And you get an idea of who lives in this town before you've even met someone. On the other billboard, we've got an interesting thing where we say, this is our vision. This is what we do. So this town produces vodka from potatoes. That is what this town does. And we do it in this way. And this is what is acceptable to us. And this is what is not acceptable to us. And these are the things that we hold dear. And this is how we like to be interacted with. So the cool thing about establishing community standards and a reason for existence is that the community itself can always reference those elements to ensure that they're still doing what they set out to do in the start. And they can check themselves and make sure that they're still on the right path, or even question whether the right path is where they're going. But it also helps new people, people that have never been in this community, to attempt to engage or to have a good footing to engage on by knowing what to expect and who to talk to if you want to know and learn certain things. So there is also a concerted effort to invest time, and this is really important. So new guy rocks up on his horse, ties it up, and then walks to the first person he meets and says, "Hi, I'm new guy. Can you tell me where Joe Schmo is? I need to talk to the sheriff because one of the rules is if you're new, go talk to the sheriff." Well, by the way, sheriffs are normally DLs. So they sort of say, "Nice to meet you. Joe Schmo is over by the potato pickers. You can see him there." And you walk up to Joe Schmo and you're like, "Are you the sheriff?" And he says, "Yes, I'm new." And the sheriff says, "Welcome." And then they have a conversation and you are already involved without actually having met someone because you know who to talk to and you know how to talk to them. So that's a really cool thing to do. But the effort of investing time is really important as a new person in a team and as an old person in the team. So an established individual in the community, both parties have to invest time, and especially when it comes to new people. So the new person has to invest time to understand the community, to figure out and have empathy for the community's current challenges and existing problems and their history and their reason for existing. And the people that are established in the community have a responsibility to invest time in the new person because otherwise they'll never integrate. And this is where it's really important for both parties to be investing. Now, the established community members also have a further investment that they need to make, which is they need to invest time not just being in the community and working in the community, but also working on the community. There's a big difference between being in something and being on something. When you're working on the community, you're actually looking at it from outside going, what are our problems? What are the things that we can work on? How can we improve? What can we do better? So that's the concept of a concerted effort of investing time into a community. The creation of a fail-friendly environment, we mentioned this earlier as a part of creating safety. It's really important, especially when you take into consideration that people can kind of come up with some really crazy stuff. So let's say, for example, a new guy who started out picking potatoes because that's what he wants to do, and that's cool. He's picking potatoes one day and he finds these green potatoes and he thinks to himself, "No, what? Nobody's ever made vodka out of green potatoes. I want to try this." And because the environment and the community is a fail-friendly community, he can go and take his green potatoes to the people who produce potato mash and say, "I would like to try and make vodka out of green potatoes." And they might look at him and go, "Well, we ain't never made vodka out of green potatoes, but let's give it a shot because we've never done it. And let's take the experiment." So they do it and they take this green potato and they make the mash and they go through the distilling process and they bottle the vodka with a brand new label and it looks amazing. And we all take a test and we spit it out because it's absolutely terrible. It is similar to paint stripper. And in this instance, we have to look at what happened in a positive light. We don't chastise the person for wasting a bunch of green potatoes and for wasting a bunch of glass bottles. You sort of look at this as an opportunity. Either we have a new product because this stuff can strip paint off of buildings, or we just say, "You know what? We are not going to make vodka out of green potatoes anymore because it's obviously not a good idea." And this is, of course, where the understanding of responsible ownership comes in, because now that we've done the experiment, we have a responsibility to teach the learnings back into the community. So the community feeds itself with new information. And there is a responsibility. So the new guy who came up with the idea has a responsibility to now explain, if you ever want to make paint stripper, use green potatoes. If you want to make vodka, never use a green potato because nothing works with a green potato. And that's the concept that should be played out into communities. It's really important that people understand that it's okay to fail. There is nothing wrong with that. And I'm not oblivious to the fact that sometimes failures can be extremely expensive. We all understand that in the real world, sometimes failures can be super expensive. But we still want to have a community where it's okay to make those mistakes and not be shot for it, not be witch hunted for it, because that really destroys the concept of what we're trying to create. So fail friendly, but also responsible ownership, very important. Then a specific interest and integration of self. If you want to build a strong community, you have to be interested in what that community is doing. There's no point in joining a community and you have no interest in what they're doing. So let's say, for example, that the guy who was picking potatoes, new guy, eventually finds out that he, maybe through his previous experience of going through all the processes, he found that he had this really passionate feeling towards bottle making and label making. And that's what he would like to do. He's passionate about that. And it's good for people in a community to be honest and open about what they're passionate about, so that the community can augment itself to accommodate these people. And we all understand that it's not always possible, but we try our best. So he walks up to the chief bottle maker, whoever that might be, and says, listen, I would like to make bottles. And in a positive community, the response would probably be, okay, let's try you out. You might suck at making bottles, but let's give it a shot and see if you can learn the skill. In a negative community, they'd most likely tell you, you know what, go back to picking potatoes because that's just easier. Just don't waste our time. Well, that's what they think. You got to know your potatoes, because green potatoes don't work for everything, right? So that's a really important self. And it helps you to integrate, because you're being open and honest about what you're passionate about, and you're allowing the community to give you an opportunity to integrate. And it again plays back into that investment of time. The community now has to invest time in you to help you to upskill in being able to make bottles. But the point is that we're in a space where all of these things are acceptable, because we're not just a rigid structure. We're a community. We take care of our own, and we make sure that the rules are engaged with. Then the establishment of a culture of empathy. Now, this is probably the single most important thing that differentiates a normal team from a community, is that empathy is a cultural thing. It is something that is almost habitual inside of that community, is that we have empathy. We've got empathy for the fact that people are new. We've got empathy for the fact that there are problems. We've got empathy for the fact that people are going to make mistakes and they're going to feel horrible about it, because even in a fail-friendly environment, it's not fun to make a mistake. It feels terrible. And the creation of a culture of empathy and applying empathy into the people that are inside of the community really makes a huge difference in the establishment of a community. A community without empathy is doomed to failure. It will not exist very long. Now, why empathy and integration is so important, and I mean a full integration of self. All demons die very hard. And it's important to understand why. Empathy opens the doorway for a person to start integrating themselves, because there is a level of vulnerability and exposure that an individual has to go through in order to integrate themselves into a community. They have to be extremely vulnerable about, what their shortcomings are and what their needs are, and about what their skills are and what their skills are not. And the community has to be empathetic towards this individual, but it also, on the other side, the individual has to be empathetic towards the community. There's nothing worse than somebody who's new and walks into a community and starts criticizing it. I mean, you're just going to have a tough time integrating. It's never going to happen for you. But empathy is really what drives this. Empathy in a community allows people to be truly honest about their needs. And this is where we just need to take a moment to understand what this means, because this is something that I've in my career found is not always practiced enough, is being honest about your needs in a safe, psychologically safe and fail-safe environment. The reason why this is so important is that people suffer from conditions, anxiety, cluster headaches, depression, fibromyalgia, imposter syndrome, you name it. There are so many people with so many conditions today. Almost anyone has it. And I'm not saying it to be funny, but the fact is that we work really long hours and we're knowledge workers, and we put a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves to perform. And we don't take enough time for ourselves. And this creates problems and things that we have to deal with. And being able to be open and honest about those needs allows the community to be empathetic towards you and say, well, okay, you suffer from anxiety, so let's see how the community can help you monitor your condition, how we can help you to be in a less anxious state. I suffer from depression, and it's such a strange thing to say, you suffer from depression. But I suffer from depression, and some days it's crippling. It's absolutely ridiculous. I get so upset with myself some days, but that's the condition that I live with. And for me to roll out of bed every morning, one of the things that helps me do that is that I get to go and join an awesome community where I'm accepted for who I am, because I was open about my needs, and the community that I'm in is very accepting and very non-punitive when it comes to saying, listen, I need help. Please help me. This is my need. So it's very important for people to be able to do that. Oh, I've lost my mouse pointer. There we go. Being open about your needs allows the community to be accommodating. We've just spoken about it, and it's probably one of the more important elements in a community, is that we can be empathetic towards the individual, not just the work, not just the process, not just what the community needs to achieve, but the actual individual, and say, we can do things to help you specifically. Having empathy for people's needs helps to build trust and safety, which is another great thing. Safety as a result, and applying empathy will give you a certain amount of safety. The trust, in the other hand, is something that you have to be very careful with. It's made out of glass, and you should never drop it, because once it's broken, you can never put it back together again. Which is something that community builders need to understand, that empathy and trust, if misused, can do a tremendous amount of damage, and it can really hurt the community if you don't take care of it. Now, we need to understand also that why is empathy and integration of self so important, is that having trust and safety in our environments allows us to exponentially learn faster, because we're completely honest about who we are. We're completely honest about what our needs are. We know that we're in a fail-safe environment. We know that we're in a responsible ownership environment. We know that nobody's going to get shot or hung if they do something wrong, or if they make a mistake, or if they do an experiment. So the result of this is, with a community, you learn exceptionally fast. I mean, exponentially faster than anyone else, because the barriers to innovation have been removed. And this is something that is really cool about having a community, instead of just having a team with a very rigid structure and sort of, you can't do this and you can't do that. Having a community where experimentation is welcomed is something that helps that community grow faster. And there is the responsible ownership allows for those learnings to become very much a part of how the community functions. It becomes almost semi-law. If you're going to do the experiment, you have to explain what the experiment's result was. Positive or negative doesn't matter. What did we learn, and how can we further improve on that? So these are some of the reasons why empathy and integration is so important. This is the slide that everyone's been waiting for, because that's what the title says. Why community is important? Why are communities important? Communities are important because what we are a part of is key in shaping our knowledge, feelings of safety, and communication style. What we are part of. What is it that I'm involved in? Who are the people that are involved in this thing with me? What are the rules? What are we trying to achieve? The second one is, who are we part of? So what is this town that we're living in? What is this business that we're functioning in? And what is our vision and mission for this business? And that is what being in a community allows you to do, is to define these things very overtly, and that you can follow them and continuously improve on them. And then where we belong, and this is something that is extremely important, especially for knowledge workers. Where we belong is a key part in shaping an identity, trust, and safety. If I know who my tribe is, if I know what community I belong to, then I can express myself freely. I can be my best self. I know it sounds very cliche, but I can be my best self because I'm in a space where I know what I'm part of, I know what we're trying to achieve, and I know where I belong. And I know the people around me, and they respect me, and I respect them, and there's a tremendous amount of empathy. And we move forward through life, helping each other exponentially learn faster. And that's why community is really important, above team structure. And I'm not knocking anyone who's a team builder. There's nothing wrong with building teams, but I found that community really creates this human side of interaction in business that is so sorely needed. And this is why knowing the community you live in is so important. The community allows us to share the burden, learn faster, and master our environments quicker. And this is something that is a lot of the times not thought about, because people have a very mechanical way. in a lot of times, I'm not saying it's everywhere, but people have a very mechanical way of engaging with work and their colleagues. They don't share burdens. So for example, if you're in a space where you're having a really tough time, but you can't tell anyone about it because it's not acceptable to do that, you're suffering alone. And that immediately has an impact on your ability to perform, and it has an impact on your ability to have fun and be engaged and be stimulated by the environment. So having that sense of community where we can share burdens, where we can share the workload, we can share the stress, we can share the heartaches, we can share the celebrations, that really allows us to put our minds in a space where we can learn faster and we can really master our environments a lot quicker. It's just that concept of we're able to be together and we're taking care of each other. Some tooling, because tooling is important. This is the spine model. It was designed by Kevin Trinkworthy and Donnie Rue. If you know them, they're probably going to see this. I'm going to butcher it badly. Feel free to come and throw a brick through my window. That's completely cool. But the spine model works from the principle of needs that drive values, that drive principles, that drive practices. Now, it's important to understand that this chain moves down. And if you want to, and the reason why it's called the spine model is if you use this model to communicate, you can keep your spine aligned, which means that you keep your direction aligned. So the need, it's the almost that emotional part of what you're doing and why you're doing it. That's sometimes difficult to explain to people, but it's really important. That's why we need for something. You can't always verbalize it, but you feel it. It's part of who you are. So it's the why is whatever is being discussed is important. What it drives, what drives it. It's that always seeking why is the need that we're trying to deliver. The value is the value derived from the topic or concept. Like, how is it affecting our community? For example, what is the value that we're trying to unearth here? The principle, that's very simple. These are the rules that drive the delivery of value. So this is just the principle that we work under. This is how we deliver value based on our needs and the values that we want to deliver. And then the practices are the habits and the actions that drive value and importance. So it's now that you've seen these four elements, it's important to understand that there is a why section and there is a what section. You have to be very careful about the what, because the what is almost dogmatic. Now, for people who don't know what dogmatic means, it's got nothing to do with asterisks and obliques. What dogmatic means is that it is established as a habit. It's second nature to people. And when you're dealing with a community that's been in existence for a while, a specific amount of time, I don't know what that is, but let's say it's a 2-year-old community. They have a way of doing things that has become second nature to them. So when you're trying to have, especially as a new person, trying to have conversations about why they do stuff the way they do it, you have to be very careful which conversation you choose. Because if you choose a what conversation, so let's say that you were a potato farmer in another place and you found really cool ways of farming potatoes, and you've watched these guys for a week or two, and you think that the way you farm potatoes might help them farm potatoes better. If you have a what conversation, the principle in the practice space about saying, well, you're doing it wrong, or why are you doing it this way, you have to be very careful, because even if you approach it diplomatically, it's a habit, it's second nature. So a lot of the times those conversations are seen or felt as being combative or being extremely intrusive. Why are you questioning the things that I believe are to be true? And that's a very difficult space to be in, because combative conversations very rarely end positively. It's not positive tension here. This is combative. If you focus on the why, and you take time to try and understand why they do something the way they do it, what is the need? What is the value? If you understand the why, you can influence the what. So let's say, for example, this guy rocks up and he's like, listen, I think I can farm potatoes in a slightly different way that might yield more potatoes. That's a good conversation to have, because the people you're talking to have been farming potatoes for generations. right? They don't take kindly to people telling them that they don't know how to farm potatoes. Right? They get a little upset. So if you were to walk in and say, you all are farming potatoes wrong, phew, you're never going to integrate into that community. It's going to be a really long day for you. But if you ask them why, and you truly try to understand the need and the value, you can then have what conversations, or you can challenge the what in a positive way. And then you can deliver value. So it's really a great way of communicating inside of a community, is understanding how the spine model works and really focusing on the why, exercising empathy and understanding what their need is, what their value is, and why they do things the way they do them. The second one is something called the SCARF model. Kim Nussman, who's a brilliant coach, she introduced me to this, and at first I kicked against it because there's one thing in there called fairness, which I was like, life's not fair. How can you put fairness in? And after discussing it, I finally understood what it meant. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So the SCARF model was designed by Rock, Young, and Pillsbury, and it literally is SCARF. So status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. SCARF. What do these things mean? So status is a sense of personal worth. It's where you are in relation to other people. So it's how you feel inside the community. Like, how am I being treated? What do I personally, what is my self-view on where my position is in the community? And position in the community has got nothing to do with seniority. It's got nothing to do with pecking order. It's just like, am I in a positive space? Am I in a negative space? Am I in an uncertain space? And it's really good for people to have positive status, because that helps them to integrate, and it helps them to be part of the community. Well, how do we practice improving status? It's really simple. Public acknowledgement. You would be surprised how far good public acknowledgement goes. Positive feedback. It's really important to people to hear that they've done something good and that it's appreciated. You don't have to do it all the time, but it's important to practice those kinds of things in a community so that people understand that what I'm doing is being seen and it is appreciated. And that gives them a very good sense of status. It improves their self-worth. Certainty, a sense of what the future holds, the bane of all teams. How far into the future can you see? It's something that we need to take into consideration, is that communities have to be extremely transparent, or as transparent as is humanly possible. So I'm a delivery lead, and I'm in conversations all the time that a lot of the information that's said there is confidential, for example, or it's just plain dangerous because it's not well understood enough. You can't take it to the team. So we try to practice where we say we want to be as transparent as humanly possible. So when we're telling people or giving them certainty, we're as transparent as possible. Clear expectations, setting clear goals, realistic project schedules, all of this stuff helps people to create a clear sense of what the future holds. It gives them certainty. There's also an added bonus to this. When you tell the human brain, because it's an amazing machine, when you tell the human brain that, listen, 6 months down the line, we're going to be doing this thing, just take note of it. The brain will sit and work on that problem. Whether you tell it to or not, it will be working on it. And by the time you get ready to start working on it, you probably have half a solution already designed. So it's a really great way for the community to pre-work elements by having a clear vision of what the future holds. It's a great way for them to catch up and understand it. Autonomy, the sense of control over our lives. For knowledge workers, this is probably one of the most important things that you can ever do. Providing them with choice, delegating, self-responsibility, empowerment. And a lot of people say that in real business, this isn't possible, but it's not true. You just have to design the framework in which it can happen. We all understand that there are limitations to what's possible, but then stretch out to the farthest reaches of those limitations and say, within this space, this is all of the choices available to you. This is all of the stuff that you can do for yourself. Experiment, go mad, empower people to do things. And you'd be surprised how autonomy helps people to create a sense of belonging and a sense of worth. Relatedness, a sense of safety with others. Safety, one of our favorite things that we can't create, but only create through other actions. Friendly gestures. Yeah, people feel safe when people are friendly. They feel unsafe when people are not friendly. I used to hug people when I was in an office, which I now no longer do because not everyone's a hugger. But you can do other things. For example, Foster socialization. I had this really cool comment on this talk once where someone said, the first 5 minutes of a Zoom call, we just talk. That's all we do. We just chat about anything. What did I do over the weekend? What are my plans? My dog's sick. I have a new hat. It doesn't really matter, but it just breaks that concept of we move from work to work to work to saying that let's just spend some time on people and understanding them. So that's a really cool way of creating relatedness. I do a weird thing where I'll Slack message people that I know, and I'll just tell them, listen, I thought about you last night, and I just want to check in on you, and how are you doing? And some people will respond and say, please don't do this, it's super creepy. And other people will respond and say, hey, thanks for the message. Yeah, man, it's really cool. I'm great. How are you? And there's a whole conversation that happens. And that's how I like to build community, is just reaching out and saying, hey, I'm thinking about you, and I hope that you're doing really well. Fairness, a sense of what is impartial and just. So again, transparent decisions. Transparency is what creates fairness. It allows people to understand and communicate openly. And then the candidness of clear rules. If the community is transparent and candid and everything is clear to the best possible extent, we know that it can't always be done, but to the best possible extent, then you create a space where people are safe, they understand their status, they've got certainty, they have a certain amount of autonomy, they're related to each other, and they feel that they're being treated fairly, or that the environment is fair to them. And this is one of the models that you can apply to create really cool ecosystems and help support community activities and raising the status of humans. It's a really great model, and I hope that you check it out. So the very last thing that I wanted to chat about is what can you do today to help build better communities? So what can you do today? As an individual, take a chance to be open about your needs, even if it's just with one person. And you have to be brave. And that's something that I hope that everybody understands, that if somebody is going to engage with you and be open about their needs, they're being extremely vulnerable, and they're doing something that's extremely difficult. Like, it was one of the scariest things that I ever did was to say, I phoned up my bull and I said, listen, I've got a problem. I need help. This is what's going on with me. It was a scary thing, but we are in a community of empathy that practices it passionately, and I was met with a lot of really positive feedback. Be empathetic towards your colleagues. Try to be approachable and accommodating. If you're going to be in a community and you expect people to be open about their needs, be ready for those conversations and be honest. If you can't help someone, you can't figure it out, then tell them honestly, I don't know how to help you, but let's find somebody who can, and ask their permission to say, can we broaden the conversation into the community? Because I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to engage with you on this without, I'm afraid I might cause damage. So just be honest about it. If you can handle the conversation, then handle the conversation, obviously in confidence. Don't break people's confidence. It's not cool. But be really empathetic towards the fact that people might be open and honest with you. When failure occurs, be positive about the situation. Try to be positive. I know I've been in situations where it's live production failures and the world is burning and people are really screaming and shouting about it. When you apply a positive attitude to the failure, then things go better. There's this really cool thing about some famous Formula One team, and they treated everything as an opportunity to improve. So that's how they treated failure. It doesn't matter who did it, whether it's driver, engineer, manager, it doesn't matter. When the failure occurred, their first focus was, how can we improve? That was where their focus was. So it's really cool to be positive about situations. So we focus on the failure, not the person at fault, and we learn from the situation. So fail-friendly environment, positive accountability. And this is practiced by just being positive about what's happening and being accommodating. Invest time in building relationships. Cannot stress this enough. Spend time with people, pair with them, chat with them, make mistakes with them, learn together, have coffee, send them weird Slack messages, whatever you can do to just invest some time in building the relationship with other people, do it. It doesn't cost much and it doesn't take very long. Help define the interest and the reasons for the community to exist. This is probably one of the most frustrating things that people can go through is you're in a team and you can't help define what the team does. It is so frustrating when that happens. And in communities, everyone is allowed to have their say. You know, the community might decide against what you're saying, and that's fine, but everyone's allowed to say what they want to say. And this is really important. And if you can help drive people towards, let's define what the interest is and what the reasons for this community is to exist, you can really start with a good foundation of creating a community. And then the very last thing, which is, I think a boxer said it, I can't remember who it was, but it really struck home for me when you're trying to build communities, is you need to be the person you needed when you were the new person. And I can't explain how important that is, because there's so many situations in life where if you were just given the opportunity to treat new people the way you wish you were treated when you were new, you make the world of difference in their lives. And you immediately establish really good relationships in that community, and the community grows from it. So you get an opportunity to really help uplift someone by being that person. And that's about all I've got to say about communities. Thank you very much. You can reach out to me on Werner Smit at equalexperts.com if you have any questions, or if you want to tell me why this was an award-winning talk or not. I do have the robotic vacuum cleaner to prove that I did win, so it did happen. And yeah, time for questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Werner.
No worries. Can I stop sharing?
Oh, yes, I think that's right.
Cool.
We do have some open questions, and there's one which I saw appear about 15 minutes ago, and it's been burning in my mind. So Brian says, you mentioned you should create a fail-friendly environment. What do you do with someone who repeatedly makes the same mistake?
So that's an interesting one. So fail-friendly environments also come, and that's why responsible ownership is so important. Responsible ownership forces the person who does the experiment, who makes the mistake, to also take ownership of the fact that this has happened to them. And it forces them to learn from it, because that's what you want out of the community, is that learning about what happens. Now, you also have to ask the question, is this mistake being done deliberately, or is it malicious? Or, is this person just incapable of not making this mistake? There are different ways to deal with it. You might move them to a different space in the community. You might have the community team up with them and pair and see if you can repair it. But I think the most important thing would be to establish responsible ownership when you have fail-friendly environment, because those two things have a tendency to teach each other. It's okay to make mistakes, but you have to learn from them. And if the mistake happens again, we're going to ask you why you didn't learn. And then you can have an open and productive conversation about it. So Brian, I hope that answers your question, man.
Thank you. Yeah, you said something about how learning increases exponentially in a good community environment. So I guess
in a safe community environment,
that's it. A focus on learning encourages everybody in the team to adopt that.
Correct. Yeah, it's a self-feeding process. So we're continuously learning because it's okay for us to make mistakes.
We have another question from Andre. Is there a difference in your definitions between community and culture?
So culture it's an interesting one. So community is the space that we create and the way that we interact with ourselves. The rules that the rules and the it's not habits, it's the rules and the word escapes me now. The behaviors that we have, that's the cultural part of a community. So a community is built around certain principal elements: empathy, fail-friendly environment. We can go through all of them. But the culture is what happens when these things are being executed, and the result of them will give you culture. And culture is a very different thing. So culture is almost it's the way that people interact with each other. It's the way they speak. It's the way they have fun. It's the way they eat together or they don't eat together. It's those kinds of things that are very unique to communities. So you can build a strong community by following certain principles, but then that community will evolve to become something very unique, and that uniqueness is culture.
Yeah.
In my opinion. I hope that answers your question, Andre.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking as you were talking, that's one of the challenges of remote working, isn't it? Because those cultural touch points are fewer and further between.
They're very, very hard to maintain. I had an interesting question. I want to make sure that we do get to all the questions. But I had an interesting question at one of the talks I did at DevCon, where somebody said, when you're new in the remote world, you start with a new company, you hope you get your laptop and stuff delivered before you start your start date, which, that's always nice. But how do you then integrate yourself into the community? Because there's no physical activity. And I sort of looked at the situation and I went, well, the way I normally do it is I start conversations. So, for example, wear a funny hat and force people to ask you, what is that thing on your head? It's a great way to just start a conversation about who you are. I mean, there's no point in having a conversation when you're new to a company saying, hi, my name is Dave and I'm a front-end dev. Like, dude, I can get that from your Slack profile. That's not hard. It's really important to try and be vulnerable, because this is the real key thing. If you want to integrate into a new community, you've got to be a bit vulnerable. And, just have a conversation with people like, hey, my name's Dave and I love fishing. Does anybody else like fishing? I'm like, no, I don't, but tell me about fishing. Maybe I'll be interested in it. So it's that concept. Who's next?
Yeah, in the spirit of getting through the questions, we have a comment here about active knowledge sharing as a characteristic of a strong community.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely agree with Rhett on that one. Active knowledge sharing. Well, it's part of the responsible ownership thing. So it's not just responsible ownership is not just about experimentation. It's not just about doing something new. Responsible ownership is also when you are the bottle labeling guys, everyday bottle labeling. If you find a better way of labeling bottles, then teach that and make sure that that's there. But it's a really cool thing, and I'll definitely take that and put it in the presentation.
Thank you.
But yeah, active knowledge sharing is super important. I definitely agree with that.
And there's a possibly loaded question here from Mohammed. Can a community be friendly without support of managers or organization leaders?
I would say yes, to a point, because managers and organizational leaders don't control the way that you react and interact with people. That's always you, and that's always your decision, and no one can take that away from you. The way that you choose to treat people is really up to you. So friendliness is not something that's determined by managers or organizational leaders. Whether the community can be established to allow for example, being open about your needs and experiencing those emotional exchanges, that is something that definitely can be influenced by managers or organizational leaders. And it's really sad when that happens, because it happens quite a lot. But I don't think that the concept of friendliness or the way you treat people is controlled by anyone but you.
Yeah. So we've got 5 minutes to go. I've got a couple more questions left here. So Reth has made a comment about communities of practice. Your description of community reminds me a lot about classic communities of practice.
Yes. So we can actually answer 2 questions at once, because I see there's a question from Grant about how do you build communities at scale. So communities of practice is a really interesting thing, because creating community is creating the emotional bit and the empathy bit and the sense of belonging and understanding around a very specific set of interests. Communities of practice, I think it's Emily Weber wrote a book, which is currently the I Ching, about communities of practice. Communities of practice are excellent bodies for helping shape, at scale, helping shape things like ways of working, things like how we choose to interact, and helping teams to monitor and check on themselves and investigate problems. So let's say a community is experiencing some kind of deficiency or some kind of conflict. That's where a community of practice, people who are experienced in a certain field or are just experienced in building teams, can help interact with that unique community to say, well, let's see what's happening. So it's a very interesting thing that a community of practice is far more focused on helping a larger group of people, whereas the team community that I'm talking about is the very unique bit that most people interact with in their day-to-day activities. I hope that answers your question, Rita, or at least addresses the comment.
So would establishing communities of practice be one of your tips for building communities at scale?
At scale, definitely. I have never experienced the joy of just building communities and having them flourish without having some kind of guiding, so let me just use the cliche, North Star about what good looks like. And a place where you can actually go and talk to someone about what good looks like. And you can ask them to come and look at what you're doing and say, well, yeah, this looks pretty good, or no, there's some spaces for improvement. So yeah, communities of practice, definitely that's how you would scale the concept of building communities. And just the last thing on that, the community of practice, a lot of the times contain really influential people, or if you want to build a community of practice, I would highly recommend having some influencers in there, not Instagram influencers, like real influencers, because they can help defend what teams are doing on the ground from a principle and perspective level. And they can have those why conversations about why this stuff is important, and then show the value, and then principles and practices will follow. So yeah, communities of practice, super important at building at scale.
I think that is a great piece of advice to end on. Thank you, Werner, for such an enlightening, interesting talk. And thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. We have a slide that we're going to show that says we are hiring. And if you're interested, there is a contact address which should appear, or else we'll stick it on. Oh, here we go. Great, thank you. You can find the recording of the talk on this URL here. Our next talk is June the 29th. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and please join us again soon.